Casting resin with alcohol ink is loads of fun. Alcohol ink works as a perfect dye for resin, or you can float the colors through the resin as it's curing and create these magical little worlds that you can look into. So any type of alcohol ink is going to work. I'm going to be using Jacquard's Pinata Colors for this. What else do you need? You're going to need gloves. This stuff is messy, and have more than one pair. You're gonna take some off and then probably need to put more on along the way. You'll want to cover your area in plastic, and if you have silicone mats, I love to work on these because if any resin gets on there after it cures, you can just peel it right off and use it again the next time. It's wonderful. You're gonna also want popsicle sticks. They're perfect for stirring, and when you're done, you can just toss them. These kind of cups are my favorite. You want to be able to measure your resin out, and I can measure by the rungs that I pour to on these little plastic cups. So I highly recommend these, but if you have a silicone measuring cup, that works great too. It's something that's reusable. Always great when you're making less waste. Now we need a mold to cast into. Now, you can cast resin into plastic molds, but you're gonna need to use a mold release for that. Also, I have a lot of trouble with those kind of breaking after just a couple pours. So if you're going to be doing multiple pours, or you want to get rid of a headache off the bat, get yourself a silicone mold. These work fantastic, and they give you that nice shiny effect, so you don't have to do a lot of post sanding and finishing work. Silicone molds come in a bajillion different shapes and sizes. This one is for a purse clutch. You can get them for card holders, napkin holders, all types of jewelry. Resin's great for jewelry, by the way. Coasters. Now, once you've picked your mold, you know what you're gonna cast. You wanna get the right resin for the mold. So let's talk about that. I personally am gonna be using in this video, and what I use almost exclusively, is Art Resin. It fits the bill for my needs. I do a lot of various artwork. I'm a multimedia artist, and Art Resin is great for sealing art as well as casting as a resin. I like it in that capacity. I also like that it's pretty simple to use. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. It has no VOCs. I do want to take precautions and wear gloves and not get it on me, but I can work in a well-ventilated area with a fan and the windows open and not have to have a giant respirator at all times, which is great. That's because it has fumes. Once it starts to cure, it off-gases fumes that are terrible for you to breathe in, so please take precautions. Art Resin is my choice because it has the no VOC factor. It makes a big difference to me to know that I'm not going to be inhaling and killing my brain cells, because I need them all. I do. Art Resin is also food safe. That means after it's cured, I can use it to serve food. Food can come in contact with this, and it's safe. Every other resin has its own properties. They are going to have different ratios, different dry times, different hardening processes. So just follow your directions on that. One area that Art Resin is a little bit different, depending on what you're doing, it's not so great with heat. So if you're going to be putting very hot things on, like let's say you want to make a trivet, Art Resin's not your best choice. It's going to melt pretty fast, and the cast piece will mark or dent under high heat. If you're going to put a hot pot on it or something like that, you need to look at a different high temperature resistant resin. Pick your resin, and let's play with some alcohol inks. Okay, here's the fresh stuff. Actually, I've had this for a little bit, but it has not been opened. Air is what really is the enemy of these guys. But see how crystal clear they both are? This is what you want. Resin has a shelf life of about 2 years, even less if it's been opened. You can tell if it's going bad, one part will start to turn yellow. This is good to go. Okay, my cups are filled and we're ready to pour. This stuff at room temperature is pretty thick. It's like syrup, basically. So you want to take your time pouring it out. Make sure that you get all of it out of your cups so you're not messing with your measurement. And this is ready for a swirl. Every resin cures at a different rate. For Art Resin, you want to immediately start stirring this stuff, using a popsicle stick to scrape the edges and go back and forth across the bottom. What you don't want to do is whip it up, because you're going to get bubbles in there, and bubbles, they won't go away. They're so hard to get rid of. It is not impossible to get rid of bubbles, but they are not your friend, so you want to kind of avoid that. By all means, make sure the most important part is that your resin is completely stirred and all together. I set a timer for 3 or 4 minutes. As I'm stirring this one, I wanted to let you know there are some ways that you can help yourself out and get rid of some bubbles even before you pour. One is you can sit your art resin bottles into a little bucket of hot water or warm water. This is going to heat the resin up and make it thinner so it holds less bubbles. And when you do have a bubble, it rises to the surface and pops much easier. However, it does shorten your working time. This stuff, once you get it mixed, the clock is ticking and you only have so long before things start to get a little too sticky to manipulate. If you do add the heat, you need to work fast once you start to pour. The key to success with resin pours is to make sure that you have everything laid out before you start to mix your resin, because once this is mixed, it's ready to go. This part of the process is when you want to add a little bit of color if you just want to tint your alcohol ink. Alcohol ink is alcohol or ethanol based. That is why it works so well with resin. You don't want to put anything water based. Keep water far away from resin. It will tragically affect the way that it cures. My resin is mixed and I'm ready to pour. Boop. Resin will level itself out, so I'm just going to let it ooze out to the edges, nice and slow. And then if I need to add a little more, I can, but it's better than overflowing it. Time to drop some color. Alcohol ink dripped directly on to the wet, uncured resin is going to start to float through, and each of these has a different weight. The heaviest are white and the metallics. I'm going to start with some colors, some yellows, some magentas, just dripping them onto the back. Once I get the back fully loaded with color, I can then add even more on top of that. Remember, these are transparent colors, so they will visually mix. Starting with magenta and then going to yellow means that I'm going to get something closer to a red. Now I'm adding a little bit of orange. I'm sticking with the warms on this one. As these colors start to float through the resin, it will actually churn the resin around. They're going to pull down through the resin as it is setting. Every color has a different weight. Even though these are all very lightweight, some are heavier than others. White is the heaviest of all of them, and it will pull through colors and bring them all the way forward into your mold. Putting white back or behind colors means that it's going to mix with it, and this way I will have these pinks and reds that pull through instead of just white. Putting white down first means that white is going to pull straight through and then some colors will be floating behind it. Either way you want to layer these is just fine. There's not a right or a wrong to it. The part that can be tricky is figuring out how much ink to put on the back of the resin so it floats through to where you want it. If you put too much ink on the back, it floats all the way through and gives you a solid front. If you don't put enough, it all stays on the back. So I like to put varying amounts in a few different dishes and just run a test, because the amount of ink and how far it floats through your resin is going to depend on how thick your mold is and how deep you are casting. This is a little bit of a trial and error, but man, it's a fun one to watch these colors bloom. And as they go on, they kind of pull into the center. So using just a little bit of ink will give you edges that are almost completely clear. Even if right now it looks like they're all to the edge, as these cure, they're going to churn and pull into the center, and it'll be really neat to watch these as they progress. It's tomorrow, and it's time to demold our resin. These have been sitting overnight. They're still very flexible, but they're not sticky to the touch. Now, if something is sticky, or if it's so flexible that it's really the mold itself giving it its shape, you're a little too early and you need to wait a little bit longer. Now remember, our goal is to make resin that's nice and hard, but if you didn't stir things up completely, it's possible that your resin is still very sticky and may, in fact, never cure. For that reason, if it's your first time, I would recommend wearing gloves. If there is uncured resin and you get that on your hands, it won't kill you, but whew, it's so hard to wash off. I really hate the way that it feels. So I'm going to demold this one first. This is the one where we put some color down. Ooh, it's really flexible still. But let's take a look at that. Now this, I did go back. You didn't see the edges. I dripped some pearl around the edges because as you saw when it was curing, all of the color kind of pulls to the center and I didn't want to have a full clear ring around the edge of this. But this one has a few spots that have floated all the way to the top. But you can see that float through starting to happen. So this one is where we used more white. We had that one down first. This one we put the white behind, and you can see where the white has come through, but it pulled the pink. So there's no just stark white here. And this one has stark white because we put white down first and then color behind it. Kind of reminds me of a jellyfish. It's pretty beautiful. This one worked out quite well. This has got the purple, or the blue violet rather. And I love the way that the tinted blue kind of shows on this one. These remind me of little petri dishes. Here we have, this is the one that we use the metallics on. So color and gold and pearl. And this one you can see that floating through it. Let me hold this up to the light so you can check it out. And you'll notice all of the bubbles, it looks like they're sparkles, but they're actually bubbles. If you want to get rid of bubbles completely from your life in the world of pouring resin, you're gonna need a pressure pot. If you're putting resin over top of artwork, using a toothpick or a straw to blow bubbles to the surface is great. And you can even torch them out. But when you're using alcohol ink, one, you can't torch it because alcohol ink is extremely flammable. Two, it's just too thick to get all of those bubbles out for a surface treatment. So what you need is a pressure pot that actually pulls all of those bubbles out, and you'll get a crystal clear finish every time. Casting parts like doorknobs and coasters, or things that are going to otherwise get mounted to things or sit flat, you don't have to worry so much about what's happening behind. But if you have over poured your mold or under poured your mold and you've got a weird edge, you may want to do some finishing. And most especially if you're doing jewelry. Most pieces of jewelry where they're fully three-dimensional, you're gonna have an edge that is different than the rest. So we want to even that out, and I want to show you how to finish your work once you've pulled it out of a mold. This is a bangle that I poured into this mold here. So the edge here, while it will be nice and glossy, it's still going to have a harsh edge. So to start with, you can knock big chunks off by using a Dremel really quickly. But then you really want to get to your sandpaper grades. I like to put sandpaper, tape it down flat to a surface so I'm not working on an angle in any way. You have to grade it down. You can't just do a little sanding and be done. You have to start with a coarse grade. This is a 220, and work your way up to something nice and smooth. So I go from 220, these are white because I've used them for sanding already, 320, 400, you can see how we're jumping up, 800, This is a wet dry, and then I have a full-on polishing film. I want to sand as much as I can in each one of these grades till I get a nice smooth finish to where texturally I can close my eyes and they feel the same. They may not look the same though. Visually, even though this is a very polished look, it's still going to have a little bit of a matte finish. So to finish it off to where it looks completely equal all the way around, I want to get that nice glossy finish. I'm actually going to mix just a teensy weensy little bit more resin and brush that on, and it's going to give me a crystal clear finish and get rid of any of that milky matte finish that I don't want on this fully three-dimensional piece. And then it's ready to go. In short, resin and alcohol ink are pretty much best friends. You can do so much with them. And it's a lot of fun to work in a three-dimensional way with these beautiful inks.